The pain had stopped hours ago. That was the strange thing about torture. After a while, the body just gave up trying to tell you about it. Daewon sat in the cold metal chair, his wrists bound behind him, and stared at the wall across from him. The wall was smooth and gray like everything else in this prison. The Vex did not believe in decoration. The interrogator stood in front of him, breathing hard. The alien's skin glowed faint blue at the edges, a sign of frustration Daewon had learned. The Vex could not hide their emotions the way humans could. Their bodies betrayed them. "You will tell us where your fleet is hiding," the interrogator said. His voice was flat, mechanical. "All humans break eventually." Daewon said nothing. He had said nothing for 3 days. Not because he was trying to be brave, but because there was nothing to say. His fleet was gone, destroyed. He was the last one left from his unit, captured when his escape pod malfunctioned. The Vex could torture him for a year and learn nothing useful. The interrogator leaned closer. "Why do you not scream? Why do you not beg?" That was an interesting question. Daewon looked up at him, meeting the alien's 3 eyes. He spoke for the first time that day. "Because that is what you want," Daewon said quietly. "You want me to break. If I scream, you win." The interrogator stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and left the room without another word. The door sealed behind him with a hiss. 2 guards came in to move him. They were different from the interrogator. Younger, less sure of themselves. One of them hesitated before grabbing Daewon's arm, as if he expected the human to fight back. Daewon did not fight. He let them pull him to his feet and drag him down the corridor. The prison was massive. Daewon had seen parts of it when they first brought him in. Endless gray corridors, hundreds of cells carved into the rock of an asteroid. The Vex kept all their prisoners here, not just humans, but members of a dozen other species they had conquered. Everyone separated, everyone alone. They threw him into a small cell. He hit the floor hard and stayed there for a moment, catching his breath. The door slammed shut. "Daewon?" He looked up. There was another human in the cell, a young woman with short black hair and a bandage wrapped around her left hand. She was staring at him with wide eyes. "Hey, Jin," Daewon said. He pulled himself into a sitting position against the wall. "You are alive." "Barely." She moved closer to him, keeping her voice low. "I thought they killed you. You have been gone for 3 days. Interrogation," he said simply. Heijin's face tightened. She had been his communications officer on the ship. Young, only 26, but smart and capable. Now she looked like she had aged 10 years. "Did you tell them anything?" "There is nothing to tell. The fleet is gone." She closed her eyes. They sat in silence for a while. The cell was cold and empty except for 2 thin mattresses on the floor. There was a small toilet in the corner with no privacy screen. The Vex did not care about such things. "We need to get out of here," Heijin said finally. "We need to find a way to escape." "Not yet," Daewon said. She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean, not yet?" "Every day we stay here, we get weaker. We need to act now while we still can. If we try to escape now, we will die," Daewon said calmly. "We do not know the layout of this place. We do not know the guard rotations. We do not have weapons or tools. We would not make it past the first corridor. So what do? Just sit here and wait? We watch, we learn. We wait for the right moment." Heijin shook her head, but she did not argue further. She knew he was right. They had been soldiers long enough to understand that rushing into a bad plan was worse than having no plan at all. The next morning, the guards came to take them for processing. They were led down a different corridor, through a series of security checkpoints and into a large room where other prisoners stood in lines. A Vex official scanned each prisoner with a handheld device and assigned them to work details. Daewon paid attention to everything. The number of guards, the placement of cameras, the way the doors opened and closed. The Vex were efficient, but they were also predictable. They followed routines. Routines could be learned. One guard caught his attention. This one was different from the others. He moved more carefully, his eyes scanning the room even when he should have been relaxed. He wore the markings of a mid-level soldier. Not high enough to give orders, but experienced enough to be trusted with security work. The guard noticed Daewon watching him. Their eyes met for a brief moment. The guard's skin flickered orange, surprise maybe, or curiosity. Then he looked away and continued his patrol. Back in the cell that evening, Daewon lay on his mattress and thought about that guard. The Vex were not supposed to be curious. They were trained from birth to follow orders, to never question their place in the hierarchy. But this one had hesitated. He had looked at Daewon like he was trying to figure something out. That was interesting. The days began to follow a pattern. Wake up, morning processing. Work detail in the prison's maintenance section. Evening meal. Return to cell. The work was simple and boring. Cleaning, sorting supplies, basic repairs. The guards watched them constantly, but they did not speak to the prisoners unless giving orders. Except for that one guard. He appeared on the rotation every few days. His name tag read Taemin. He never spoke to Daewon directly, but he was always there, watching. On the 5th day, something changed. Daewon was carrying a crate of tools down a corridor when he stumbled. The crate fell, tools scattering across the floor. A normal guard would have yelled at him, maybe struck him for being clumsy. But Taemin just stood there watching as Daewon bent to pick up the tools. "You do not act like other prisoners," Taemin said quietly. Daewon paused, then continued gathering the tools. He did not look up. He did not want to seem too eager. "What do you mean?" he asked. "You do not beg. You do not fight. You do not try to escape. The interrogators say you do not even scream." Taemin's voice was careful, as if he was afraid someone might hear. "Why?" Daewon stood up slowly, holding the crate. He looked at Taemin directly. "Because screaming gives them what they want," he said. "It shows them they control me. As long as I do not scream, I am still free in here." He tapped his temple with one finger. Taemin stared at him. His skin flickered through several colors. Orange, then yellow, then a deep purple that Daewon had not seen before. "Confusion, maybe, or something else." "That does not make sense," Taemin said. "You are a prisoner. You have no freedom." "They can lock my body in a cell," Daewon said. "But they cannot lock my mind. Not unless I let them." Taemin opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around nervously, as if realizing he had been talking too long. Then he gestured sharply with his weapon. "Move," he ordered, his voice harsh again. "Back to your cell." Daewon obeyed without protest. But as he walked away, he felt the guard's eyes on his back. That conversation had planted something. A question. A tiny crack in the wall. That night, Heijin asked him what he had said to the guard. Daewon told her, "Are you crazy?" she hissed. "You are going to get us both killed. They will think you are trying to recruit him or something." "I am not recruiting anyone," Daewon said. "I am just answering questions. Questions that could get us executed. Maybe, but I do not think so." That guard was curious. The Vex are not supposed to be curious. That means something. Heijin lay back on her mattress, shaking her head. She thought he was being reckless. Maybe she was right. But Daewon had learned something important during those 3 days of interrogation. The Vex were strong, organized, and disciplined. But they had a weakness. They had never learned to question. They had never learned to think for themselves, and that weakness could be exploited. Not with weapons or violence, but with something much more dangerous. Ideas. Later that night, as Heijin slept, Daewon lay awake in the darkness. He thought about Taemin, about the confusion in his voice. He thought about the question the guard had asked. "Why do you not scream?" It was a simple question, but it meant Taemin was already asking himself other questions. Questions like, why do I follow these orders? Why do I lock people in cells? What am I doing here? Daewon smiled in the darkness. He had no weapons. He had no allies. He had no way to contact his people or call for rescue. But he had something the Vex did not expect. He had patience. And he had words. And sometimes that was enough. Part 2, 3 weeks passed. The routine never changed. Wake, work, eat, sleep. The same gray corridors. The same cold cells. The same silent guards. But something was different now. Taemin came more often. At first it was just during the regular patrols. He would walk past Daewon's workstation and glance at him. Nothing more. But gradually the glances became longer. Then came the questions. They were small questions at first. Simple things. Where are you from? Taemin asked one day, standing near Daewon as he sorted supplies in a storage room. Earth, Daewon said. A planet in the outer system. What is it like? Daewon paused his work. He could tell the guard was genuinely curious. This was not an interrogation. This was something else. It is beautiful, he said slowly. Blue oceans. Green forests. Mountains that touch the clouds. In the morning, the sun rises over the water and turns everything gold. Taemin was quiet for a moment. His skin flickered a soft blue. "I have never seen an ocean," he said finally. "I was born on a military station. I have only known ships and bases. Did you choose to be a soldier?" Daewon asked. The question seemed to confuse Taimin. His skin flashed orange. "Choose? No. My family is military caste. We serve from birth. There is no choice." "What if you wanted to do something else?" Daewon asked carefully. "What if you wanted to be a farmer or an artist or a teacher?" Taimin stared at him like he had said something crazy. "That is not how things work. Everyone has their place. You cannot just change it." "On Earth you can," Daewon said. "I was not born a soldier. I chose to become one. Before the military, I was a teacher. I taught children about history and philosophy." Taimin's skin went through several colors at once. Purple, orange, yellow. Daewon recognized confusion and disbelief. "That is impossible. How can a society function if everyone just does whatever they want? It works because people choose what they are good at, what they love. A farmer who chooses to farm works harder than one who is forced. A soldier who chooses to fight is braver than one who has no choice." Taimin opened his mouth to respond, but another guard called out from the corridor. He straightened quickly, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Back to work," he said harshly, then turned and left. But Daewon noticed something. As Taimin walked away, he moved more slowly than usual, like he was thinking about something heavy. That evening, back in the cell, Heijin confronted him. "You are playing a dangerous game," she said. "I heard what you told that guard. You are putting ideas in his head." "Yes," Daewon said simply. "Why? What do you think will happen? He will just let us go because you told him about Earth?" "No. But he will start to question. And questions lead to more questions." Heijin shook her head. She was frustrated with him. She wanted action, a plan, something concrete. But Daewon knew that violence would not work here. They were two prisoners against thousands of guards. The only weapon they had was their words. The conversations continued, sometimes during work details, sometimes during cell checks. Taimin would find excuses to be near Daewon and they would talk. Never for long. Never where the cameras could see them clearly. But it was enough. Daewon told him stories about Earth, about cities where people elected their leaders, about markets where anyone could sell anything, about schools where children learned to think for themselves, not just to obey. Taimin listened to everything with a hunger that surprised them both. He had questions about everything. How did elections work? What happened if someone broke the law? What if people disagreed with their leaders? "They protest," Daewon explained one day. "They march in the streets. They write articles. They argue and debate. Sometimes they vote the leaders out and choose new ones." "And the leaders allow this?" Taimin looked shocked. "They have to. The leaders work for the people, not the other way around." Taimin was silent for a long time after that. Daewon could see his mind working, processing this strange new idea. But Taimin was not the only one listening. Daewon had noticed another guard who always seemed to be nearby during these conversations. A younger one, female, with nervous energy in the way she moved. Her name tag read Yunseo. She never spoke to him directly, but she was always there, just close enough to hear. Her skin would flicker with colors as she listened. Curiosity, fear, excitement. She was absorbing every word. One day during a routine inspection, Overseer Il-sung appeared on their work level. He was the administrator who ran this section of the prison, tall, cold, with skin that rarely showed any color at all. He walked through the corridors with military precision, checking everything. When he saw Taimin standing near Daewon's workstation, he stopped. "Guard Taimin," Il-sung said sharply. "Why are you in this section? You should be on perimeter patrol." Taimin straightened. His skin flashed white. "Fear. I was checking on the human prisoners, Overseer, making sure they were working properly." "That is not your assignment. Return to your post, now." "Yes, Overseer." Il-sung watched Taimin leave, then turned his attention to Daewon. His eyes were cold and calculating. "Human," he said, "you will not speak to the guards. You will do your work in silence. If I hear that you have been talking, you will be sent to isolation. Do you understand?" Daewon nodded. He did not argue. There was no point. Il-sung walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. But the damage was already done. The seeds had been planted. Daewon could see it in the way some of the guards looked at each other now. There was uncertainty, doubt, the beginning of questions. That night, as Daewon lay in his cell, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Light ones. Someone trying to be quiet. The footsteps stopped outside his cell door. There was a soft sound. A piece of paper slid under the door. Daewon waited until the footsteps faded away, then got up and retrieved the paper. It was a note written in crude human script as if the writer had been learning the language. The note said, "If we wanted to leave, could we? You said everyone has choices, do we?" There was no signature, but Daewon recognized the handwriting pattern. It was the same style used in Vex's military reports. This note came from a guard. Heijin woke up and saw him holding the paper. "What is that?" she whispered. Daewon showed her. Her eyes went wide. "You need to stop this," she said urgently. "This is getting out of control. If they find out a guard is questioning orders, they will execute him. And us." "I cannot stop it," Daewon said quietly. "It has already started. The question is out there now. Once someone asks if they can leave, they have already begun to imagine it. And once you imagine freedom, you cannot stop imagining it." Heijin looked at the note again, then at him. Her expression was torn between fear and something else. "Hope, maybe. What are you going to do?" she asked. Daewon took out the small pencil he had hidden from the work supplies. He turned the paper over and wrote a single sentence in clear, simple words. "Yes. If you believe you can." He folded the paper and slid it back under the door, into the corridor. Then he returned to his mattress and lay down. Heijin stared at him in the darkness. "You are either the bravest person I have ever met," she said softly, "or the most insane." Daewon smiled. "Maybe both," he said. And then he closed his eyes and waited to see what would happen next. The transfer came without warning. One morning, guards burst into the cell and dragged Taemin from his quarters. They did not tell him where he was going or why. They just moved him to a different section of the prison, far from the human detention wing. Taemin did not resist. He could not resist. That was not how the Vex worked. You followed orders. You did not question. But as they led him through the corridors, away from the place where Daewon worked, he felt something strange inside his chest. A tightness. A loss. He did not want to leave. That thought terrified him more than any enemy weapon ever had. He did not want to leave. But he had no choice. He never had a choice. That was the problem. Before they locked him in his new quarters, Taemin made a decision. He had been recording his conversations with Daewon on a small data chip, hidden from the surveillance systems. It was against regulations. It could get him executed. But he had done it anyway, because those words felt important, like something he needed to remember. Now he took that chip and found Yoon Seo during the next shift change. She was standing alone in a supply corridor, checking inventory. He walked up to her quickly. "Take this," he whispered, pressing the chip into her hand. "Listen to it. Share it with the others who are listening." Yoon Seo looked at him with wide eyes. Her skin flashed orange and yellow. "Fear and curiosity, what is it?" she whispered back. "Truth," Taemin said. Then he turned and walked away before she could ask more questions. Yoon Seo stared at the chip in her hand. It was small, no bigger than her fingernail. She should report it. She should take it to Overseer Il-sung immediately. That was her duty, but she did not. Instead, she hid it in her uniform and finished her shift. That night in her quarters, she put the chip into her personal data reader and listened. The recordings were simple. Just conversations, Taemin asking questions, Daewon answering them. But the words hit her like physical blows. Choice, freedom. The idea that people could decide their own lives. That soldiers could leave the military if they wanted. That leaders could be questioned and replaced. That happiness mattered more than duty. Yoon Seo listened to the entire recording 3 times. When she finished, she sat in the darkness of her quarters and cried. She did not know why she was crying. She just knew that something inside her had broken open, and she could not close it again. She was not the only one. Yoon Seo shared the recording with 2 other guards she trusted. They shared it with others. Within a week, the recording had spread through the entire detention wing. Guards listened to it in secret, in their quarters late at night when the surveillance systems were cycling through other sections. Small groups began to form. Guards who wanted to talk about what they had heard. They met in storage rooms, in maintenance shafts, anywhere the cameras could not see them. They spoke in whispers, afraid of being caught. But they could not stop talking. What if we could choose? What if we could leave? What would we do if we were free? The questions spread like a virus through the ranks. And like a virus, the authorities noticed when people started acting sick. Overseer Il-sung saw the change first, guards taking longer on their rounds, conversations stopping abruptly when he walked by. A strange energy in the air, like static before a storm. He could not identify the source, but he knew something was wrong. Then came the incident with Boram. Boram was a senior guard, 20 years of service, never a single mark against his record. One morning he walked into Il-sung's office and made a request that had never been made before in the history of the Vex military. "I wish to transfer to civilian work," Boram said calmly. "I do not want to be a soldier anymore." Il-sung stared at him in shock. For a long moment he could not even speak. "That is impossible," Il-sung said finally. "You are military caste. You cannot simply stop being a soldier." "Why not?" Boram asked. "I have served for 20 years. I am tired. I want to do something else with my life. Because that is not how our society works. You know this." "Everyone knows this." Boram's skin flickered purple. "Sadness, I know, but I am asking anyway. Because someone once told me that asking is the first step to choosing." Il-sung felt cold fear wash over him. He recognized those words. They sounded like something a human would say. "You are under arrest," Il-sung said, "for sedition and attempting to abandon your post." Boram did not resist as they took him away. He went quietly with dignity. 2 days later, he was executed in the central courtyard. All the guards were required to watch. Il-sung thought the execution would frighten the others, would remind them of what happened when you stepped out of line, but it had the opposite effect. The guards watched Boram die with his head held high. They watched him face death without fear, without regret, and they realized something important. Boram had made a choice. For the first time in his life, he had chosen something for himself. And even though it cost him his life, there had been a strange peace in his eyes at the end. That night, more guards joined the secret meetings. The virus was spreading faster now. Il-sung knew he was losing control. He called for reinforcements from other sections. He increased surveillance. He started interrogating guards at random, trying to find out who was behind this unrest. But the more he tightened his grip, the more the guards slipped through his fingers. Meanwhile, Daewon and Haejin were moved to isolation cells. Separate cells, deep in the prison where no other prisoners could reach them. They were kept apart with no communication between them. Daewon sat alone in his small cell. No windows, no light except for the dim glow from the corridor. He had no idea what was happening outside. He could not see the guards, could not talk to anyone. For the first time since his capture, he felt truly isolated. But then he started to hear things. Voices in the corridors outside his cell, guards talking to each other when they thought no one could hear. "Did you hear about the new arrests?" one voice whispered. 3 more guards taken this morning. They said Boram's name before they were locked up. Il-sung is losing his mind. He thinks there is an organized rebellion. "Is there?" A pause, then quietly. "I do not know, but I want there to be." Daewon smiled in the darkness. He could not see what was happening, but he could hear it. The doubt in their voices. The quiet hope. The beginning of something bigger than any of them had planned. Yunseo had become the center of the growing movement. She did not plan it that way. She was just the one who had the recording, who knew the most about what the human had said. Other guards came to her with questions. She tried to answer them the way Daewon had answered Taemin. They met in secret. They made plans. Not for escape, not yet. That seemed too big, too impossible. But they started doing small things. Small acts of resistance. They would loosen the restraints on prisoners during transport. They would turn off surveillance cameras for a few minutes during their shifts. They would share their rations with prisoners who were starving. Tiny things, things that would not get them caught immediately. But each small act felt like a victory. Each time they chose to do something kind instead of cruel, they were choosing, and choosing felt powerful. Il-sung felt the prison slipping away from him. He sent reports up the chain of command. The situation was deteriorating. He needed help. He needed someone with more authority to come and restore order. High Command responded. They sent someone Il-sung had never expected to see. High Commander Kyung-soon arrived 3 days later with a full security detail. She was legend in the Vex military, the Iron Hand of the Empire. She had crushed 12 rebellions, conquered 20 systems, never lost a battle. If anyone could fix this situation, it was her. She reviewed the reports in silence. Then she did something Il-sung did not expect. She asked to meet the human prisoner. They brought Daewon to an interrogation room. He had not seen daylight in weeks. His body was thin, his clothes dirty. But when he looked at Kyung-soon, his eyes were clear and sharp. She studied him for a long moment. "You are causing problems," she said finally. "I am just a prisoner," Daewon replied. "You are more than that. You have infected my guards with dangerous ideas about freedom and choice. Do you deny this?" "I deny nothing. I spoke truthfully to anyone who asked me questions. I told them about my home, about how humans live. That is all." Kyung-soon leaned forward. "What do you want?" she asked. Daewon met her gaze steadily. "I do not want anything," he said quietly. "But your guards do." "I just showed them it was possible to want something different than what they were told to want. And now that they know it is possible, you cannot make them forget." High Commander Kyung-soon sat across from Daewon in the interrogation room. She had dismissed the guards. It was just the two of them now, separated by a metal table. She studied him carefully. This human looked weak, thin, tired, but his eyes were steady. There was something in them that made her uncomfortable. Not fear, not anger, something else. Understanding, maybe. "I could have you executed," she said. "Right now. One command from me and you would be dead within the hour." "Yes," Daewon agreed. "You could. But that would not solve your problem, would it?" She continued. "Because the problem is not you. The problem is what you have put into their heads, ideas, questions, doubts." "I did not put anything into their heads," Daewon said calmly. "I just answered their questions honestly. They put the ideas there themselves." Kyung-soon was silent for a moment. She had fought many enemies in her career, rebels, pirates, insurgents. She knew how to break resistance. You found the leader and you removed them. Without leadership, movements fell apart. But this was different. This human was not leading anything. He was just talking. And his words had spread like poison through her guards. "How did you fight words? How did you kill an idea?" "I will make you an offer," she said finally. "Stop talking to the guards. Stop spreading your ideas. In return, I will transfer you and your companion to a comfortable facility. Better food. Private quarters. No more interrogations. You will live out the rest of the war in peace." Daewon looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. Kyung-soon felt surprise flash through her. Prisoners always took deals when offered. Always. It was human nature to choose survival. "Why not?" she asked. "Because I cannot stop what has already started," Daewon said. "Even if I never speak another word, the questions are out there now. Your guards have already begun to think for themselves. I cannot make them stop. Nobody can." Kyung-soon stood up abruptly. Her skin flickered red. "Anger. Then you are a fool," she said coldly. "You could have saved yourself. Instead, you will die here, and so will your ideas." She walked out. The door sealed behind her with a heavy clang. Daewon sat alone in the empty room and smiled sadly. He had told her the truth. The ideas were already out there. Nothing could stop them now. Not even his death. Outside, Kyung-soon gave her orders. Overseer Il-sung looked relieved. "Arrest any guard suspected of disloyalty," Kyung-soon commanded. "Interrogate them. Find out who is organizing this unrest. Use whatever methods necessary." "Yes, High Commander," Il-sung said. He was eager to show that he still had control. The crackdown began that night. Guards were pulled from their posts without warning, taken to interrogation rooms, questioned about their loyalty, their thoughts, their private conversations. Some broke quickly and gave up names. Others stayed silent. Within 3 days, more than 40 guards were detained. The prison became a prison for its own staff. Everyone watched everyone else. Trust evaporated. Fear took its place. But fear can only control people for so long. Eventually, fear turns into something else. Desperation, anger, the willingness to risk everything because you have nothing left to lose. Tae-min heard about the arrests in his new section. He heard about guards being tortured for information, about executions planned for anyone found guilty of sedition, and he made a decision. He had been transferred to a security detail guarding the detention center where they were holding the arrested guards. It was supposed to be a position of trust. Il-sung thought Tae-min was still loyal because he had been moved away from the human prisoners. Il-sung was wrong. On the fourth night of the crackdown, Taman waited until his shift partner went to check another corridor. Then he moved quickly. He opened 3 cells. 3 guards he knew from the recordings. Guards who had been caught listening to his conversations with Daewon. "Go," he whispered. "Take the service tunnels to the lower docking bay. There is a maintenance shuttle there. Override the locks with this code." He gave them a data chip. "Get out of here while you can." The 3 guards stared at him in shock. "What about you?" one of them asked. Taman smiled. It was a strange expression on his face. He had never smiled before. "I will be fine," he lied. "Go now," they ran. Taman watched them disappear into the tunnels. Then he turned and walked calmly back to his post. He knew what would happen next. The alarm would sound when the escape was discovered. They would review the security footage. They would see what he had done. He had maybe 20 minutes of freedom left. He spent those 20 minutes sitting quietly in an empty corridor, thinking about the ocean Daewon had described. Blue water, golden sunlight, things he would never see. But he had made a choice. His choice. And that felt more valuable than anything else in the universe. The alarm sounded 18 minutes later. Guards came running. They found Taman sitting peacefully, not trying to hide or escape. They arrested him without a struggle. The trial was short. Less than an hour. Taman was found guilty of treason, sedition, and aiding in the escape of prisoners. The sentence was death to be carried out immediately. They brought him to the central courtyard. All guards were required to attend. Il-sung wanted them to see what happened to traitors. He wanted them to be afraid. Kyung-soon was there too. She stood on a raised platform, watching as they led Taman to the execution point. His hands were bound. His uniform had been stripped away, but he walked with his head high, his skin showing a calm gray color. Before the execution, Kyung-soon stepped forward. It was tradition for the commanding officer to speak to the condemned, to give them a chance to repent. "Guard Taemin," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "You have betrayed your caste, your duty, and your people. Why did you do this? Why did you throw your life away for 3 traitors?" Taemin looked at her. Then he looked at all the other guards watching. His voice was clear and strong when he spoke. "Because I finally lived," he said. "For my entire life I did what I was told. I never questioned. I never chose. I was not alive. I was just functioning. But then someone asked me a simple question. Why do you do this? And I realized I had no answer. No reason except that I was told to. And that is not enough anymore." He paused, looking around at the assembled guards. Many of them had their eyes fixed on him. Their skin was flickering with colors: purple, orange, yellow. I helped those 3 escape because it was my choice. Not an order. Not a duty, my choice. And even though it cost me my life, I would do it again. Because for the first time I was truly alive. Silence fell over the courtyard. Kyung-soon felt something cold settle in her chest. This was wrong. Executions were supposed to be warnings, deterrents. But Taemin did not look afraid. He looked peaceful. And the other guards were not looking at him with disgust or anger. They were looking at him with something else: respect, understanding, maybe even envy. She gave the signal. The execution was carried out quickly. Taemin died without a sound, his eyes fixed on the sky above. The guards were dismissed. They filed out of the courtyard in silence. But that night, in the darkness of their quarters, they thought about what Taemin had said. They thought about choice, about being alive instead of just functioning, and the virus spread faster than ever. Kyung-soon returned to her quarters and reviewed the security footage. She watched Taemin's final moments over and over. She watched the way he had smiled, the peace in his eyes. She thought about the human prisoner who had started all of this, Daewon. What kind of person could infect an entire military base with rebellion without lifting a weapon? Without shouting or threatening or fighting? She pulled up his file. Read through his history. Captain Daewon Kim, former teacher, psychologist, linguist, joined the military when his colony was threatened, fought bravely, captured during a retreat, tortured for 3 days and never broke. She read the interrogation reports. The interrogators described him as calm, patient, almost serene. They said it was like interrogating a stone. Nothing they did affected him. But that was not quite right, was it? He had affected them, not by resisting, not by breaking, but by being himself, by speaking truth, by showing them that there was another way to live. Kyung-soon turned off the screens and sat in darkness. For the first time in her long career, she did not know what to do. You could not kill an idea. You could not torture it out of people. Once it took root, it grew, and this idea had deep roots now. Outside her window, the prison complex hummed with activity. But underneath that surface calm, something was brewing, something that would soon explode into the open. And when it did, Kyung-soon would have to make the most important choice of her life. 48 hours after Taemin's execution, the prison felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Guards moved through their duties with mechanical precision, but their eyes were distant, thinking, calculating, waiting. Yoon-seo had spent those 2 days barely sleeping. She moved between secret meetings, whispered conversations, coded messages passed during shift changes. The network had grown beyond her control. What started as a few curious guards had become something much larger, something that felt inevitable. More than 60 guards were ready now. A third of the facility's staff. They had a plan. Not a perfect plan, but a plan nonetheless. A cargo transport was scheduled to dock in 3 hours for supply delivery. They would seize control of it, disable the prison's communications, and escape to neutral space. But there was debate about one thing. Should they take the human prisoners with them? Some guards said yes. The humans, especially Daewon, had sparked this rebellion. They deserved to be free. Others said no. Prisoners would slow them down, make the escape more dangerous. They needed to think about their own survival first. Yoon-seo made the decision. They would take the humans. Not all the prisoners, just Daewon and Haejin. It was the right thing to do. She went to Daewon's isolation cell during the shift change when the surveillance systems were cycling. She opened the door quietly. Daewon looked up from his mattress. He had not seen anyone except guards delivering food for days. He studied Yoon-seo carefully. Her skin was flickering rapidly through multiple colors. Fear, excitement, determination. "We are leaving," she whispered. "Tonight. We are taking a transport ship and escaping. We want you to come with us." Daewon was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally. Yoon-seo stared at him in shock. Her skin flashed white. Pure confusion. "What? Why not? This is your chance to escape. We owe you this." "You owe me nothing," Daewon said gently. "I talked to your people because I wanted to, not to create a debt. And my escape is not the point. Your escape is the point. You need to do this yourselves for yourselves. If you take me, it becomes about rescuing the human who inspired you. But this should be about your choice to be free. Do you understand?" Yoon-seo's skin went through a dozen colors. She understood what he was saying, but she also knew something he did not. "If we leave you here, they will kill you," she said. "The moment we escape, Overseer Il-sung will execute every prisoner as punishment." "You know this." Daewon nodded slowly. He did know this, but that did not change his answer. Before he could speak again, another voice came from behind Yoon-seo. "Stop being noble and come with us, you stubborn fool." Haejin stepped into the cell. She had been freed from her own isolation. She looked thinner than before, with new bruises on her face, but her eyes were as fierce as ever. "You have given them hope," Haejin said to Daewon. "You have shown them what freedom looks like. Now give them a chance to save you, because that will mean something too. It will prove they are not just running away. They are choosing to help someone who helped them. That is what makes them different from the Vex. That is what makes them free." Daewon looked at his former communications officer, then at Yoon-seo. He saw the determination in their faces, and he realized Haejin was right. Sometimes accepting help was just as important as giving it. "All right," he said quietly. "I will come." The escape began at shift change when half the guards were rotating off duty. It was the moment of maximum confusion. Yoon-seo and her network moved fast. They disabled the surveillance systems first. Then they overrode the cell locks for selected prisoners, not just Daewon and Haejin, but a few others who had formed bonds with guards. They moved in groups toward the docking bay, using service corridors to avoid the main checkpoints. Alarms started blaring halfway to the docking bay. Someone had noticed. Overseer Il-sung's voice came over the facility speakers, ordering all guards to defensive positions. But many guards did not respond. Some because they were part of the escape, others because they simply refused to fight their comrades. Some even joined the escapees, making last-minute decisions to leave. Il-sung tried to organize a defense at the docking bay, but his commands fell on deaf ears. Guards looked at each other uncertain. They had been taught to obey without question, but questions had been planted in their minds. Why should they stop their fellow guards from leaving? Why should they fight people who just wanted to be free? The group reached the docking bay. The cargo transport was there, massive and ready. Yunseo led a team to the cockpit while others secured the loading ramps. Daewon and Hae-jin stayed in the middle of the group, protected. They were almost aboard when High Commander Kyung-soon appeared. She stood at the far end of the docking bay with a full security detail. 20 armed guards, weapons raised, blocking the path to the transport. The escapees stopped. They were outnumbered, trapped. Kyung-soon walked forward slowly. Her skin was a deep dark red, anger, or maybe something else. She stopped 10 meters from Daewon. "Stand down," she ordered. Not to the escapees, to her own guards. "Lower your weapons." The guards behind her hesitated. Then slowly they lowered their weapons. Confusion rippled through everyone watching. Kyung-soon looked at Daewon. He stood calmly, hands at his sides, no weapon, no fear. Just watching her. "You did this," she said. It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "No," Daewon replied. "They did this. I just told them it was possible." Kyung-soon looked past him at the escapees. 60 guards, maybe more, all watching her, all waiting to see what she would do. She could order an attack. She could kill them all. But what would that accomplish? The idea was already out there. The question had been asked. Can we choose to be free? If she killed them, she would prove the system was cruel and oppressive. She would create martyrs, and more guards would question, would doubt, would eventually rebel. The empire would rot from within. But if she let them go, she made her choice. "Go," she said quietly. The silence was absolute. Everyone stared at her. "High Commander?" one of her guards asked, uncertain. "I said go," Kyung-soon repeated, louder this time. "Take your ship, leave, you have already won. Killing you now would change nothing." She looked at Daewon one last time. He made a small gesture. Not a salute, not surrender, just acknowledgement. A silent thank you from one warrior to another. The escapees moved quickly, boarding the transport before she could change her mind. Yunseo was the last to board. She paused at the ramp, looking back at Kyung-soon. "Why?" she asked. "Why let us go?" Kyung-soon was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised even herself. "Because you asked the right question," she said, "and I did not have a good answer." The transport engines roared to life. The ship lifted off, flew through the docking bay doors, and disappeared into the darkness of space. Kyung-soon stood watching until it vanished. Her guards waited nervously behind her. "High Commander?" Il-sung's voice came over her communicator. "What are your orders?" She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Stand down. Secure the facility. No reprisals against the remaining staff. That is all." She would face consequences for this. There would be an inquiry. She might be demoted, imprisoned, maybe even executed. But she had made her choice. And strangely, she felt lighter than she had in years. Inside the transport, the escaped guards and prisoners gathered in the cargo bay. Some were crying. Some were laughing. Some just sat in stunned silence, not quite believing they were free. Daewon sat against a bulkhead with Hae-jin beside him. She looked at him with a mixture of exhaustion and amazement. "You did it," she said. "You really did it. You broke them without firing a shot." "I did not break them," Daewon said. "I just reminded them that they were not broken in the first place. The rest was their choice." Yunseo approached them, her skin showing a soft blue. "Peace finally, what do we do now?" she asked. "We are free, but we have no home. No place to go. What comes next?" Daewon smiled. "Now you figure that out yourselves," he said. "Freedom is not a destination. It is a practice. Every day you will have to choose it. You will have to decide what kind of life you want to build. That is the burden. And the gift," Yunseo nodded slowly. She understood. This was not the end of their journey. It was just the beginning. The transport flew deeper into neutral space, away from the Vex Empire, toward an uncertain future. Behind them, in the prison they had left, other guards were having quiet conversations, asking questions, wondering if they too could choose. The virus was still spreading. 6 months later, the escaped guards had established a small colony on a frontier world. It was rough and difficult. They argued about everything: how to govern themselves, how to distribute resources, what rules they needed. Democracy was messy and frustrating, but it was theirs. More defectors arrived each week. Guards who had heard the recordings, guards who had witnessed the escape, guards who simply could not go back to following orders without question. The colony grew. Daewon and Heijin had returned to human space, but they stayed in contact. Yunseo sent him regular messages asking for advice, sharing news. The colony was thriving despite the difficulties. One day, Daewon received a message that made him smile. Yunseo had a question about a dispute in the colony. Should they vote on a new leader, or rotate leadership among different people? He wrote back simply, "That is for you to decide. You do not need me anymore." That evening, Daewon stood outside his quarters on a human colony world looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, in those vast distances, his words had taken root. They had grown into something beautiful and dangerous, a belief that freedom was possible, a belief that anyone could choose, a belief that even the most powerful empire could not stop an idea whose time had come. Heijin joined him outside, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed him one and stood beside him, following his gaze to the stars. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Daewon sipped his tea, feeling its warmth spread through him. "I am thinking that we won," he said quietly, "not with weapons or violence, but with something more powerful. We taught them to ask questions. And once you start asking questions, you never stop." Heijin smiled. She raised her cup in a small toast. "To questions," she said. "To freedom," Daewon replied. They drank their tea and watched the stars, and somewhere in those stars, former guards were building new lives, making choices. Being free, the human had not escaped the prison. He had destroyed it from within, not with force but with hope. And that, in the end, was the most human thing of all.